Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a very special guest, and our guest today is Sharon Eagen. Now, Sharon is a professionally certified educational therapist. She's also a cognitive coach, and she's a Feuerstein trainer. So that's interesting, and we're going to find out a bit more as we go in today's episode about that. But just to let you know that Sharon started her journey into education in a very reluctant decision, really, because she was homeschooling her children. And it was only then that she discovered this incredible passion for learning and how different, there are different processes that can be used. And so what she actually did is she transitioned into teaching in the traditional classroom setting. And before long, she was not only training students, but she was also training fellow teachers and administrators. So it's a really, really good episode. We're going to go into this more, but you're going to see here Sharon's passion, because her passion has continued to grow, because what she went on to do was complete her master's degree in organizational psychology. And then she began coaching people in their professional pursuits. And so Sharon, you will see today, she has this thirst for learning, and it's actually led her into pursuing learning, training and coaching opportunities all around the US, but also all around the world. And so this has actually culminated into the creation of something called the cognitive link, which Sharon's going to tell you more about soon. So get your cup of tea ready, get yourself settled, and let's get started with this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Somatic Movement and Mindset podcast with me, clinical somatic educator and founder of Total Somatics, Heidi Hadley. The Somatic Movement and Mindset podcast has been designed to help you gain a deeper understanding to how your mind and body work. You will learn about your amazing mind and body and why over time you can feel pain, recurring injuries and poor posture. Within this podcast, I will teach you why this doesn't have to be your future or the norm for you. Would you like to learn how to reduce pain, move freely, and gain a new lease of life? Let's get started.
And welcome back. So can you see from this wonderful bio at the very beginning here, Sharon is a wealth of knowledge and experience. And so I'm going to introduce you to Sharon now. And as we bring Sharon in here, what I'd like to ask Sharon first of all is, well, first of all, welcome. But Sharon, can you tell us a little bit more on top of what we've just mentioned in the bio about how you came into this rewarding area of work?
Absolutely. Yes, I was a reluctant homeschooler. I'm sure many of you listening are very familiar with that, given what our world has been going through the last couple of years. And for a variety of reasons, mostly schedule, we had decided to homeschool our kids. I wasn't really excited about that. But as I went on, I got very excited about the process of learning. How do we learn something? Why did one of my children get this? And I taught it the same way to this other child, and he didn't get it. And so it really set me digging into the learning process. How do we learn? And eventually my children went to a traditional school, and I got to become a teacher and expand my understanding of how our brain works. How do we learn and grow and make change in our lives in general? So I get pretty nerdy about it, I'll be honest, Heidi. I love to think about how do we make change?
Well, you're in the right place, because we love nerding and geeking out on everything learning. So you're in the right place. And I was going to say, because Sharon's just recently held a workshop for the Total Somatics members, and this is what she was really talking about. And I was hoping we can kind of elaborate on this as well, Sharon, because you've seen that experience of the different learning models and techniques that will resonate with different individuals. But you were talking earlier about the brain plasticity, how important that is. And also what we were discussing in the workshop was about that sort of rumination and that doubting and that sort of thing. So just because of looking at different mechanisms and different ways that people can deal with different situations, could you tell us a little bit more, first of all, about how our brain has this capacity really to keep adapting and changing, just for anyone that's very new to that expression of neuroplasticity?
Absolutely. It's this amazing, amazing idea that our brain isn't stagnant. You mentioned that I'm a Feuerstein trainer, and Reuben Feuerstein would say that our intelligence is a state, not a trait. And a state can change, it can grow. You think about the states of matter and how that will change. But a trait, my eyes are always going to be this color unless I put on some colored contacts, but my eyes are really still always going to be this color. That's a trait. And so our brains are designed to change and to grow. And that's really exciting to think about. You know, there's so many people who, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, whether it's a doctor's diagnosis or a health challenge or a teacher statement, believe that they can't, believe that they're always going to be, this is just the way I was made. This is just who I am. And I just want to scream from the mountaintops, no, you have a choice. Your brain was designed to change. And the way our brain changes is by challenge. Challenge and novelty. Those are the two things that really light up our brain when something's a little tough or something's new. And unfortunately, a lot of us want to avoid the tough things, and we like the comfort of the known things. We need to do challenge and novelty for things to change. And that's what happens in our brain.
And I think what's really good is that, you know, you mentioned in the workshop about the adaptability, you know, everything's changing all the time. And you made a key point that I thought I'd just see if we could weave in here really is you said that you tend to move away from the word of resilience and more in adaptability, which I thought was such a good point within the workshop. Are you able to kind of share with the listeners here a little bit more? Because I thought that really, you know, because it's like the in word at the moment, isn't it, with everything that's been going on. But can you share a little bit more into the insight of why you made that statement?
Absolutely. So resilience is the word of the day. It continues to be this idea of, you know, what we've gone through the past couple years, and the emphasis on being trauma informed, particularly in education circles, and that we want to build resilience into students, into learners, into adults. And I take a different take on it. When you look up the definition of resilience, it's the idea that something bounces back. It's the idea that you can get back to where you were. If you're familiar with silly putty, I often will take silly putty when I'm speaking and hand it out to people and talk about the fact that it's not so much that this silly putty is resilient and that it's always going to go back to the same form. It could, but it's really that it's adaptable. It can become many different things based on the need. What do I need it to become? And so I think it's much more beneficial to talk about adaptability. When we tell people coming through COVID that, you know, we need to be resilient, we want things back the way they were, well, we've all learned that's not going to happen. We're not going back to where we were. We are not going to be the same, and we shouldn't be the same. When you go through something as challenging as COVID or a serious illness or a devastating life experience, you should not come out the same way you went in. You should have changed. And so there should be a level of adaptation to what is the new normal. And so I encourage people not to think about building resilience, but Feuerstein would call it modifiability, the ability to be changing according to what's needed, the ability to adapt. And that's what we want. That's what we want to be able to do as individuals, to help adapt ourselves so that we can help our families adapt to what the new normal is, but also in the workplace, right? As an employer, you're not looking for individuals who can always be resilient and go back. You're looking for employees who can adapt to whatever the new normal is, make that change. And that's the learning process. The learning process is about building adaptability and understanding, solving the new problem, whatever that new problem is.
And that's a really, really interesting point, because that then kind of weaves into when you mentioned earlier on about optimistic alternatives, because I'm assuming that again, academically we know these sorts of things, that the brain changes, our body's adapting, we have got this new normal, but sometimes it's that little voice in our head, isn't it? And it can be cultural things, it could be the way that we've been raised, all sorts of things can create those little questions with limiting beliefs. But you mentioned before about this optimistic alternatives, and how does that work in the fact that we're moving away from less of the resilience but more into the adaptability, and how that weaves into that neuroplasticity, and really it makes us grow, doesn't it, from what we learn?
Right, because those limiting beliefs tell us to remain the same. The limiting beliefs tell us this is all there is. This is my box, and I have to stay in my box, and I can only handle what's in my box. When we talk about resilience, what we're saying is, I want you to make sure you can fit back in the box that you were in before. That's not hopeful. Those limiting beliefs steal hope. Optimistic alternatives say to us, what's possible? And so when we can take those limiting beliefs, when we can take the idea of that voice that says, I can't do this, and flip it on its head and make it into a question that says, how could I do this? Or what if I could do this? Then what might be possible? Then all of a sudden, we've taken what is keeping us in the box, and we're knocking the box down, breaking it down, and we're seeing that there are other possibilities there. When we think about those limiting beliefs, the challenge of overcoming a limiting belief is part of what changes that neuroplasticity, the rewiring of our brain, and the brain's ability to do that. So I think that as we think of these thoughts in our head that keep us where we are, we need to take advantage of something that the brain's been wired to do, which is to respond to questions in a very different way than it responds to statements. So the brain is wired with something called instinctive elaboration, that when you ask someone a question, if it's even for a millisecond, they have to attend to it. Their brain attends to it. If they hear it, it's their conversation, they're going to attend to it. So we have this opportunity in there to make a choice at that point. What are we going to do with that? So taking those limited beliefs and flipping it into a question engages our brain, fires up those neurons, and helps us to begin to make progress and move forward movement. That's really important. Questions can do that.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, weren't we, that when we do go into those questions, it's much more powerful, because again, I'm pinching some stuff that you mentioned in the workshop, but there were some really key points that I'd love the listeners in the podcast to hear. And that was, you mentioned that affirmations are great, but they've got their place, haven't they? Because of what you were talking about, the power of actually creating that curiosity, switching it into a question rather than just a blanket statement or an affirmation. Are you able to kind of elaborate on that? Because I thought it was such a...
Because, affirmations are kind of like the idea of describing what I'm wearing. Okay. I'm wearing this shirt. Okay. Today, my shirt has blue and green plants or flowers or something on it. I'm not even sure. Okay. So when we give affirmations, we're standing there, we're saying, I am this, I am strong, I am powerful, I am confident. And that has its place to speak, to ourselves. But when you flip that to a question and you say, what can I do? How will I show my strength today? Where will I need my confidence today? How can I use my power today? That is about action rather than description. And description is fine until the description doesn't line up with your experience. If I say I'm strong and then I go to work and I have a very weak moment, then I have this disequilibrium. I'm telling myself this, but this is not my experience. And that can lead to a lot of not good things. It can lead to more doubts, more depressive behaviors. But if I say to myself, how can I use my power today? Then that sets me into a plan. And a very specific, you know what, I'm going to use my power today to make a difference for a specific person. In a school setting, like if I was in some leadership, I might say, I'm going to use my power today to make sure that this particular teacher gets a break, because I have the power and the influence to do that. And so I'm going to do that. Well, then I have that success. I have a plan and I can implement that plan. It's not this broad idea that I'm powerful. We're not all always powerful. No matter what our position is, there's always someone above us. We don't always have control. But if we make a plan about how to use the power we do have, then that is more empowering. That moves us into more action, which leads to more change.
What would you say though, Sharon, if, because all that is absolutely brilliant, but imagine in like the last 2 years, everyone's been through the mill, haven't they? There's been the pandemic, there's been job losses, you know, everyone's got their story really. So although there's that side of things, if that doubt and that kind of ruminating is really starting to paralyze people, you know, you can get into that point that you just can't even think straight, can you, anymore? And if there's been either the life events in the last 2 years have impacted your, say, social circle, or maybe it's illness itself has kind of made you lose your self identity, you know, and who you are as a person, how can we kind of step forward into something that feels quite uncomfortable and at the moment might feel overwhelming in this mammoth task? Because in some situations, people feel that there is no end to what is going on for themselves at the moment.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, it's really heart-wrenching when you think about what people have been through in the last couple of years, right? When you think about COVID, when you think about long COVID, there are many, many people who are still really dealing with the effects of the disease, or individuals who have been in utter isolation because they have health issues and can't take risks, no matter if things are opening up, or other illnesses, right? Because just because it was COVID doesn't mean that everything else stopped happening. So one of the things that happens with illness is an isolation. And my husband and I have just gone through this in the last year and a half or so with some other medical issues, brain surgery and open heart surgery in a period of 18 months. And so and COVID was happening. So we were pretty isolated. And what happens is a kind of inertia, right? So staying isolated becomes your norm, and you need some outside force to create action, because staying isolated is become your new norm. And you may not like it, you may not even realize it, that that's what has happened. And so one of the things that I always encourage people to do first is some real self-reflection. How would you describe yourself now? And how would you have described yourself 2 years ago? Where are the differences? Why are the differences there? Do you want to change those differences? Some of them you may be like, you know what? No, I actually like it better now. Others may be like, yeah, I don't like who I am now. This is where it's really important to realize the difference between who you are and what you do. Because who we are changes through time, but not as much as what we do. And we live in a world that assigns identity by our action. And action is an identity. You can change action much more easily. So look at those, do that comparative list. Who am I now and who was I 2 years ago? What do I like about the change? What don't I like about the change? And which of those are related to action? So maybe you're like, you know what? I used to be very social. I was very extroverted. I went out with my friends. We did things on the weekends, and now I don't. I'm very introverted. Well, you're probably not introverted. You just have to begin expanding that social circle. So what I encourage people to do is to begin small. Okay, you're not going to don't jump back into trying to fill your calendar. But who's that person I miss? Who's that person I used to hang out with, where I used to call or I used to do, and I don't anymore? And I don't really know why. It just happened because of life events. There was no relationship break. There was no event that caused it to happen. How could I reach out to them? This is where the power of questions helps us to go from, I don't have any friendships anymore, to who is a friend I could reach out to? If I was going to choose one person, what relationship is that I want to rebuild? And that might be a phone call. Though I know there's a lot of phone phobia in our day of texting. It might be a text. It might be a good old-fashioned card in the mail. But something that begins to move you forward to reestablish that relationship and expand that social circle, because we have been created to be social, right? We know that study after study shows the benefits to our health, physical and mental, when we're in community with people. So it's important that we reopen up our communities, not just our cities and our towns, but our social networks. And so how do I do that? How would I be comfortable doing that? And ask yourself those questions rather than lamenting that you don't have that anymore. Getting the first one's always the hardest, getting started. But it's critical. And I think it's critical, not just to our individual mental health, but societal health as a whole. It's very important that we do that.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, Sharon, because, you know, you said you've got to go through that feeling of being uncomfortable, because it's a challenge, isn't it, when you've got stuck in this kind of cycle of, you know, this new normal that many of us have. But you don't realize that when you're saying, if you're sending that text message out to somebody or sharing a lovely picture in a text message, how you don't actually know what's going on with that person on the other end. They might be going through the same feelings, but they just haven't taken that step forward of feeling uncomfortable. And that's how it starts, because sometimes, you know, it is our stories that we put in our head and how what we feel we project onto other people. And that's half the problem, isn't it, really? It's our mindset and what we're projecting. But as you say, then it's the society, because if one person kept doing that, you could see how you get that tribal feeling, you know, that we're all connected back together again. And you mentioned before in the workshop about that, I really like this expression, and you put, when this sort of thing happens, that just consider it that you've just been hibernating for a while. And I love that, because I thought, you know, my little tortoise, we're here in the UK at the moment, seeing family, and we've just seen my tortoise, who's about 60 something years old now, and we couldn't take him to Australia, but he's out of hibernation. And so he's like, he comes out and he's back to himself, but then when he goes in about October time for 6 months into hibernation, we know we're going to see him again. And it's just a transit, you know, it's a transitory bit of time, really. It's a small time period, but then we can just come out of hibernation.
Yeah, it's, you know, it is, it's we've been in this massive world hibernation. Okay. And so we're still who we are. We know more, we have some different values, maybe. So that idea of hibernation, that the bear is still the bear when he comes out of hibernation, right? And it's interesting too, you know, when to take the analogy a little further, you can tell you're coming out of hibernation because if you are hungry for and craving that social connection that you feel like you're missing, That's another indicator that you're ready for it. Okay. And it may have to look different depending on your network, but one small step, a phone call, a text, a note, and after you do the first one, do the next one. So maybe you're going to reach out to one person this week, and next week you're going to reach out to two, and next week you're going to reach out to three. One of the ways we get ourselves in trouble is we want to go to from 0 to 10. I haven't been seeing anybody, and I just want life back to normal. So I should have all my relationships and friendships and social engagements the way they were, and that's not going to happen. And then we go, so nothing can happen. If it can't be that, it's an all or nothing mentality that gets us in trouble. If we can say, you know what, it's one contact I'm going to make this week. I'm going to see how I feel about it and see how they feel about it. And then I'm going to make 2. Eventually, you're going to get to 10 way faster than the all or nothing mentality. We tell ourselves because it's slow progress, it's not progress. But who won the race? The tortoise or the hare?
Yeah.
So it's going to be the tortoise. And that's what's going to make lasting progress. We try to go to 10, we're going to end up wiped out and need a nap under the tree like the hare. So let's just be tortoises and move forward slowly, but surely we'll get there.
And I was going to say, because of that, it's so important, this social engagement and, being part of that connection. And so if someone's listening to this and feeling a bit reluctant to step forward, are you able to kind of tell us some of the benefits on a physical and a mental well-being of why connection is so important? Well, as a whole, but are there any studies or research or anything that you've known in your own clinical experience?
Well, I can't, I'm not really prepared to cite exact studies, but I will tell you that there have been studies that have shown a correlation between health and community. So your level of health is going to correlate with your level of social engagement. And there's a couple reasons for that. Because there are things that help regulate our body chemistry. One is physical touch, right? We know the power of a hug. A good strong hug. If you got to hold on, you need a few seconds there, good 10-second hug, you'll feel the other person relax, right? As long as they want to be hugged. No hugging people who don't want to be hugged. You'll know who they are. They will tense up as you hug. They just don't know they need it. That's all. They'll get there. But there's that physical touch that we need, right? But our brains are also wired to connect. So we have this idea of mirror neurons. These are the ones that help us connect socially. Think of it, if you've had children and you're going to feed your child, have you ever found yourself opening your mouth as you're putting the spoon in theirs? Yes, that's because of mirror neurons. This idea that I can connect and understand you, I'm going to imitate you. We have this wired into our brains because we're created to live in community, right? We have a sense of safety and security in community, that it's not all on us. When we have that bond, then our cortisol levels are lower, which means the inflammation in our body will stay lower. In a very simplistic description of that. But that idea that it increases our health, so many of our health problems are from inflammation. The things we eat and the lack of community, the isolation that we live in. And it's really increased, not just because of COVID, though greatly, but technology. We have this sense that we've connected because we've commented on Facebook, and that's a very low level of connection. But it can trick us into thinking we have connection, but it really can leave us much more isolated. This is why we're seeing the studies now with the increase of depression and anxiety in young adults. I can see an absolute difference. I have 5 kids, all adults, and an absolute difference between my youngest 2 children and my oldest 3. and their exposure to technology was very different. There just wasn't, it just didn't exist in the same way that it did for my younger two. And so as I see my younger two having much greater struggles, and they acknowledge, that, oh man, I have to get off of, Instagram. I need to be off of social media because it doesn't lead my mind to anywhere good. It allows us to see other people's lives, but what it does is it stops us at the comparative stage. So we go into this comparison of other people's lives, but we don't know their lives. In community, we know people. We begin to know who they are. We know their experiences. We begin to share our stories. We have community. So then when we see these outward trappings of life, we understand the backstory. When we don't have a backstory, we begin to have just this comparative behavior that sets us up for having us feel defeated because they don't align. And we make this assumption about having the same backstory. So this is why the in-person community, even if it's not physically in person, but it's a phone call, it's a constant connection, is so important. So I think we're seeing more and more evidence of this, and we're seeing, greater and greater anxiety in children at a younger age. And there's a lot of reasons for that, from their exposure to their parents' presence on technology and lack of engagement in that. And so it's just very, very important. Socialization matters. And that happens by taking risks. And sometimes we have to be the first one. But that's where that challenge and that novelty comes in, to rewire your brain from this sense of isolation to a sense of community. Who can I be with? What does the community need from me? What can I contribute? And the emphasis you put, instead of what can I contribute, what can I contribute? Who can I help? Who can I reach out to? There have been studies that have shown that when we serve, when we give, right, that improves our brain function. It increases and improves mood. That dopamine gets going and we want to do more. So what better thing to want to do more? Scroll longer on Facebook and lose 4 hours of our life, or help somebody and get to help more people. That dopamine is going to flow. We want that reward. We have to choose where we're going to get that reward.
Yeah. It's almost we're wanting to be a trendsetter, the right trendsetter, and start that ball rolling, isn't it? Because we've got this trend and this habit of, as you say, this whole social media, but moving away from the screen and actually just connecting in person again. And I've said it before, I'll probably say it again in the future, but it's that art of conversation, isn't it? It's really is a dying art at the moment. It's kind of the people have got to learn to kind of have that interaction again and actively listen, ask those questions, really ponder over conversations. It's all of that adds that depth and meaning to the friendships and connections with people, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's what life is, right? Right. I mean, when we're gone, all that's left are memories, right? For the people who remain. That's it. That's what's going to be sustained. So you can only make those through real deep connection. If you want to leave a legacy, you leave it through connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And how would you say you've seen some wonderful sort of transformations or some inspirational stories that you've been, fortunate to be involved with over the years? What kind of things can you share with us?
So I work with a variety of people. I work with children. I work with adults, older people. And I would say probably the most recent success story would be a student, 12-year-old boy with fetal alcohol syndrome, actually, and pretty severe ADHD. And so when working with him, I use some instruments, some tools from the Feuerstein method, but really using those tools to build connection and understanding in his thinking, allowing him to become more aware of himself. So even at a very young age, teaching him to stop the I can't. So when we first started working together, it was very difficult for him. We would work maybe 5-10 minutes and he was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. Can we stop now? Can we stop? Can we stop? And so push the challenge a little bit. Over the course of a few months, we worked together for, about 8 months. We got to a point where in our time together, his sessions became more, let's do this. I like a challenge. So we moved from, I can't do this, which was a very simple task that only was going to require him to spend a few minutes working, to 8 months later going, I want to do that one. It looks harder. I want a challenge. So the idea that when we begin to embrace challenge and understand that challenge makes change, we want more challenge. And so when we make that growth, it feeds itself. Challenge becomes its own reward. I want to do something I couldn't do before. And I think that for us as individuals, and especially as adults, very often we get caught up in the reward of the challenge. I'm going to do this and I'm going to get a raise at work, or I'm going to do this and I'm going to have this outcome in my business or my relationship. When we begin to embrace the idea of challenge for the sake of growth, for the sake of process and not just the reward at the end, we find the reward takes care of itself. So this young man who we focus on process, the idea of helping him to become more aware of how he thinks, helping him to understand that he had more capability than he thought he did, and getting him to the point of accepting challenge and desiring challenge, that allowed him to go into a school situation that we never would have thought possible 8 months ago. I thought possible, but most people did not think possible because of that attitude of, I can't do this. I don't have these capabilities. And those are all things that have been spoken into him through the years, right? From teachers, from even his self-comparison, as he looked at his peers, what they could do and what he could do. Now, he still isn't where his peers are, but he doesn't care. He's going to do whatever it takes. And he's going to embrace the challenge to make change, to make growth, to move forward. When we stop comparing ourselves to the people running beside us and start running our own race, that's when really cool things happen. So whether, you're 12 or 20 or 82, and that's the great thing about neuroplasticity, is research has shown that you can change your brain at any age, That's really powerful.
And I think that's so true, because you say it's about our personal story, isn't it, really? It's not a comparative with others, because, everybody's different. We only see the highlight reel of their life sometimes, don't we, in different settings. So we don't really know what's going on. And it's more to focus on how we can keep growing and developing. But it's true, because you kind of look back over the experience of whatever you're adapting and changing, and then you can see the transformation, because sometimes, because we're in it day in and day out, we don't notice, do we? And it's only if you've got somebody coaching you or supporting you, they'll go, look at the journey that you've already gone through. Yeah. And there's even little things like, that's so inspiring hearing that young lad. But you also think of your own sort of experience where you'll think, wow, the way that I dealt with that challenging situation, or the way that I interacted with that person, is not how I would have been before, previously. And it's sometimes those little things in our life that we then can see those little subtle changes, those little neurons, synapses are starting to really take hold, so that we are developing this new type of new normal, isn't it, really, and adapting.
Yeah. And I love what you said about that's what's so helpful about having a coach, right? It's so helpful about having a community that's also geared towards change, because when you are with like-minded people, then you create this bond that helps you clarify your identity and see those changes that you've made and adapted over time that will just feed into the things that you'll be able to do because of that process and the growth that you'll be able to make. And so, I think there's real benefit in finding the communities that support you in that journey.
And then it kind of plays back into the fact that instead of it just being academic, we've implemented those changes, and those little doubts or that ruminating thoughts, those limiting beliefs, they start to quieten down, because when we can see it in action, we're like, well, we can do anything. Actually, it's possible, isn't it? As long as we're willing, if we've got that willingness, and you can see how that then quietens down in the background, doesn't it? And then you think, well, I feel pretty good, actually.
Look what I did, right? And be able to say, I didn't even really think I could do that when I started, right? Yeah. I just got started, or I didn't really understand how big a change it was going to be. And so when you have other people who can come alongside and support that and point that out, or sometimes we need to be called out, right? And say, like, so whose voice are you listening to? What is your optimistic alternative here? And someone asks us that question, and then we go to that instinctive elaboration, and we're like, okay, yeah, you're right. And so that's the benefit of community, not only self-mediating and asking ourselves questions, but having other people who can ask us questions that keep us on track, set us on new tracks.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, it's been absolutely wonderful. If I could, I'd just go on and on, because this is so interesting, and it's so fascinating. But I'm also mindful of everyone listening as well. But what I want to say first of all is thank you on behalf of the Total Somatics members for doing the workshop for us, because it's been absolute gold, and we really appreciate it. But what I'd really like to do is give this opportunity for anyone that's not in the membership but want to know more about you as well. How can they find you?
Okay, great. So like Heidi said, I've established an organization called the Cognitive Link, and our goal is to help people learn how to learn, to understand your learning process and help you move forward. And you can find the Cognitive Link at thecognitively.com. You can find us on Facebook and at the Cognitive Link, or on Instagram. And you can also get more information about whether you want to learn about the Feuerstein method, or how to learn something new, or how to improve your learning. You can email me at info@thecognitively.com. And I'd be glad to talk to you about the learning journey and where it could take you. You might be amazed.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon. And what I'm going to do for everybody that may be driving or wherever they are and they haven't got the opportunity to write these things down, I'm going to make sure that all of these links are in the show notes, so you can get hold of Sharon quite easily by just scrolling down and seeing all the details there. So I just want to say again, thank you so much, Sharon. I've hogged you for quite a few hours today. So thank you for your time as well. And thank you for everybody that was listening. So just before we finish, is there anything that's burning that you just want to share as a closing comment, Sharon, to the listeners?
I just want everybody who's listening to know that change is possible, that your brain has been wired for change. You have a choice. Even if you can't change a situation, you can change how you're going to grow in the situation. And that will in itself change a situation. Change is possible. You're wired for it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you again, everybody. And until next time, all my love and best wishes to you. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and also forward this on to somebody you know will benefit. To learn more about pain relief, plus how to improve your health and well-being, go to totalsomatics.com. Until next time, take care.